Thanks for joining us again. I know it's a busy time as you work to get those students across the stage, and certainly commend you and just thank you for the work you do to make that happen. Life-changing experience for a lot of kids, a lot of families. So thanks for that. Today, I want to start off with a couple of reminders. First of all, next week we will go back and revisit personnel. So if you have thoughts, if there are things you want to go over again, just explore. If you would, make sure you let Chelsea or me know so that I can build that around what you want to hear. I haven't heard much to date. So I will go off of a couple of thoughts if I don't get a bunch of feedback. Also, we will then take 2 weeks off. So we'll go on the 19th. We'll take the following 2 weeks off. On June 9th, Carol Embry will be doing a session regarding cutting budgets and all of the things that you need to think about going around that. So that's kind of the next process we'll go through. So next week's personnel will take 2 weeks off. June 9th, you'll have Carol. I'm sure she'll have great information for you. Before we get into today's topic, I like to just touch base on anything I've been asked about or things that have come up. And so I want to touch on hold harmless. Reminder, and this again, Jordan was just mentioning and Kelly talking about schools that are still maybe a little bit uncertain. Are you hold harmless? Are you not hold harmless? When you do the calculator tool, it will indicate whether you're hold harmless or not. I mean, it shows up on there. So you can also reach out. Somebody can walk you through it. Just make sure you're aware, because I'm gonna just reiterate the two types of hold harmless that are happening, and we'll talk a little bit later just how budgets can change a little bit depending on which type of hold harmless you are. So if you are small school hold harmless, that means you're held harmless to a number, a fixed amount of money. And I'm going to use the example of $1 million. So
Jim,
you're,
can I ask you a question?
sure.
Are we still on your opening slide, or is it frozen?
Yes. Yeah. No, we're still on the opening
Okay.
slide. Thank
Sorry.
you. No,
Yep.
not a problem. So if you're still small school hold harmless, that $1 million is your $1 million until you get to a point where you're back on the formula, which would mean the formula creates more than $1 million. I'm working with a small K-8 right now that their enrollment is falling. That hold harmless is critical for them because it has held them at an amount of money. If you are a large school hold harmless, you are held harmless at a per pupil amount. So if you have a declining enrollment, you are going to get less money. But if the formula calculation says you should get 600,000 and the amount of per pupil amount from your hold harmless is more than 600,000, then you're going to get paid upon that amount. But if you got 700,000 last year and your enrollment went down, you probably will get less this year, because it's based upon a per pupil hold harmless amount. Small school is held on the total amount. So that's part one of that. Then the question is asked, which state money is impacted by my hold harmless status? And that is the state guaranteed or semi-guaranteed, I think recently, basic formula money. So in essence, when they make that calculation, and I said I'd use $1 million, you're still going to, if you're a small school hold harmless, you're going to get $1 million this year. If you doesn't calculate to more than that, next year, you're still going to get $1 million next year. It might be $950,000 of guaranteed payment money and 50,000 of classroom trust money. Or it might be 900,000 of guaranteed money and 100,000 of classroom trust fund money. But the combination of those two are going to equal the million that you're held harmless at. Prop C is not impacted. So if you have declining enrollment, Prop C is going to be impacted both by the calculated number and the number of pupils that you're multiplying it by. Your local taxes won't be impacted by the hold harmless, your federal program, SPED, school lunch program. None of that will have the safety of hold harmless, only your guaranteed payment. So I want to make sure that you're aware of that. And also then just quickly mention that if you're a small school hold harmless and you have had a declining enrollment, one of the things I might encourage you to think about is treating the next 2 or 3 years sort of like you would with the COVID money, the ESSER money. And what I mean by that is if you go in and you're held harmless at $1 million, but if you calculate in the formula that you should be getting paid 800,000, you might want to start thinking about that $200,000 being one-time money. So you're starting to think about how can I build my budget in 3 or 4 years on 800,000, and that 200,000 I'm either building up some long-term security or I'm using it for some one-time payments. So that just something to think about as we kind of reiterate some impacts on the hold harmless districts. So let's jump into today. Some goals today. We want to clarify a little bit on cost types, what's fixed, semi-fixed, flexible. There's probably nothing really on both ends of that. Everything is probably a little bit semi-fixed, but you'll get the point of the continuum there. What's actually controllable this coming year, we'll focus on what actually matters. We'll talk about magnitude and goals and how do we evaluate that? How do we avoid cuts that are going to create problems beyond what they're going to save? And then we'll talk through a little bit of some practical decision framework that maybe helps you build a little bit of a mental model and a structure for kind of evaluating the cuts that you might be considering. So I want to start with just easy cuts are rarely meaningful cuts. And so when the budgets start to tighten, we kind of cut what's easiest. And that kind of leads to sometimes some common mistakes that we're cutting small visible items. But when we do that, we're avoiding larger structural costs that can make an impact, a greater financial impact, and maybe have less of a political risk to it. So two big ideas, not all costs are controllable, and that's where we're going to talk a little bit about fixed versus semi-fixed and what's flexible. And then not all savings are meaningful. So you might think that you're saving a great deal of money, and when you evaluate it in the big scheme of your budget, the total budget, it may not be that much of a difference maker. So when we talk a little bit about this cost spectrum of different types of costs, we'll start with and these are just a few examples. There are many examples in each of these categories, but if we talk about fixed, you cannot really meaningful impact your utility bills over the next 12 months. You can have a little bit of impact, but not much. Your insurance is probably already fixed that you're going to get your bill from music or whoever covers that. That's not really something you can go in and say, hey, I'm going to cut my insurance by 10% this year. So that's kind of a fixed amount. Your SPED placements, if you have some high need students that are in placements or you're paying for outside services, those are likely fixed for the next 12 months so that you can't really impact that tremendously. Then you start thinking about some things that have a little bit of the ability to manage, but it takes time, it takes planning, it can cause some potential disruptions. And I think about staggering your transportation, doing some tiered routing, um, renegotiating contracts, or thinking about those contracts that maybe have just been annually renewed, and maybe it's a point in time where you could restructure that a little bit over the next 12 months, thinking about long term. Tech systems, what level of tech are you currently subscribing to, and can any of that be managed in the short term? And then you get into flexible supplies, travel, equipment timing. And by equipment timing, it's you buy it or you don't buy it. And so you have that option uh, during the next 12 months to make those decisions. And so those become a little bit easier to adjust quickly than those others. This is a really small print, and I will give Kelly a copy of this. But this is essentially a way that you can put down the different things that you're thinking about. And so as you evaluate them, you can evaluate them as how they impact the overall budget so you can get a magnitude look. You can go in and classify them so that you know, oops, sorry about that. Is it a potential savings that is significant, and what percentage of that is. So it's real easy to identify magnitude in that regard. And then you can categorize them however you want to. I just use low, moderate, and high. How does it impact instruction, and what is the political impact? And then you can kind of group them by category to determine, what is the total magnitude. So in this particular example, there are $4 million worth of moderate instructional impact items on this list. There are $5 million of moderate political impact items on this list. So it just kind of, again, it gives you an idea of how to kind of put these ideas in one place, evaluate them on their impact, and I think it will help you in the decision-making process. All right, let me get back to my other screen here. Okay. So this is a slide that will be different from district to district, and I want to make that notation here that where I have dollar impact listed there in the middle, less than 50K, and then significant being greater than 250K. In some district, that might be ridiculous. A significant impact might be 5 million. But in another district, a minimal impact could be as little as, $1,000 could be a minimal impact there. And a significant impact could be, eight or $10,000. So this is just to get you to thinking about how do I look at magnitude as to whether it's probably not worth digging into versus, yeah, I need to give this some attention. This is one that I've often used just to share a little bit to really drive home the point of magnitude versus politics. A lot of times people will say, well, we're going to cut teacher supply budgets. That's an easy, or building budgets, or athletic, uniform budgets. You can put your own experience in there. But if I cut teacher supply budgets from 250 to $200, I'm saving $50 a teacher. And my most recent district had somewhat over 300 teachers. So I'd be saving $15,000. And that's, if I just use a $50 million budget, that's 0.03 of 1% savings. If I use attrition and I don't rehire one teaching position out of those 300, my savings is a minimum of 50K. which is 3 times the impact on the budget. I have one teacher, well, it's not even one teacher because it's an attrition. I might have a pod of teachers. So if there were 5 first grade teachers in that building and now there are only 4, I may have 4 teachers out there a little bit disgruntled about the fact that they're going to have to teach next year with 4 instead of 5. If I cut $50 out of their supply budgets, I have 300 teachers potentially out there talking about the disruption to their classrooms. So that's really kind of where I wanted to go to, just to demonstrate a little bit of magnitude and politics. So I think this is also an important item to keep in mind when you start looking at how to trim budgets. The closer the cost is to instruction and or your CSIP, the more careful you need to be when you start cutting it. In other words, it goes back to those goals, those challenges, the expectations that you have as the leader, and the closer those are to instruction and CSIP, the more careful you need to be. Probably, and I think this some of the stuff Carol's going to talk about, the more stakeholders you need to have involved, you need to have some support before you just start cutting those items. So then we talk about the fact, I mentioned that most costs aren't just fixed or flexible, they're somewhere in between. But as we start to look at this magnitude, um, this will help you to also start to analyze what is the impact. Does it impact classrooms directly? Direct impact, indirect impact, probably all we do hopefully has some kind of impact on instruction, or we probably shouldn't be doing it. But does it impact the immediate work going on in the classroom? Who feels it immediately? Is this something that might not be felt for, 5 or 10 years? I think about preventative maintenance and those type of things. Versus if I do something today, our teacher's going to feel it August when they come back to work. Politics will these create noise beyond their value, and that's again a little bit unique to each district, but part of the challenge that you have as a leader to understand those politics and to kind of know where that noise would happen. And then sustainability, is this a one-time or ongoing savings? If it's something that you can create that is going to be a savings over the next 2, 5, 10 years, that's a high caliber savings. If it's just going to save you one time and next year we're going to have to figure out how to plug that again, it's not necessarily a bad savings. It's just a different type of savings that you have to understand. It may save me 50 grand this year, but next year it's going to need to be right back in the budget. So some reality check here. Try to avoid cuts that create the following: minimal savings, large frustration, and no meaningful impact. So the small savings and no meaningful impact can be a little bit the same, but as you think about these cuts, you're going to have a certain amount of energy, you're going to have a certain amount of political capital, and you need to understand how to use it effectively. So here are just some examples of potential large savings that are outside of personnel, because hopefully I drove home the point last week that the only significant ongoing savings in the big scheme of a budget, if we're talking a $50 million budget, we're going to assume that probably 35 million or more are tied up in personnel. So we're talking about that other 15 million now. How can we have some savings? So when we think about purchase services, there's always a bit of concern about contract creep. So you had a maybe three superintendents ago, you had a contract for, I don't know, who knows, a library subscription, a some type of support subscription, a library or a classroom fad that was going on, and that contract has just continued to renew and maybe even expand. And so you need to do some investigating to determine which one of those ongoing renewable contracts, and maybe it's with tech, it is needed. One, certainly if it's not needed, you can get rid of it. But two, is being used. We found when we did some of that that we were just renewing some ongoing software renewals that the elementary principals weren't using anymore. They weren't using them in the classroom. So we cut those. Also want to look for redundancies. Are there some things that are crossing over? Are you paying company A to do some filtering and you're paying company B, and one of their tack on features is that they provide some filtering? Well, you probably don't need both. And so really starting to evaluate those contracts and determining what value is there and what can we do without, because you're going to find that every little bit of those that you can save that doesn't require you cutting back a staff member is going to be a savings well used in order to keep somebody in front of a student. Utilities, you really cannot cut them, but you can manage them. So just beginning to think a little bit about efficiency, how your facilities are being used, those type of things. And then transportation, I talked a little bit about routing, fuel, trips, how those are working, doubling up when you can, sending two teams on one, I mean, whatever, figuring out a way to send the cheerleaders with the basketball team or whatever, having some creativity there. And then supplies, again, you just have to handle that carefully because you don't want your patrons coming into dirty buildings. You really don't want to start making your teachers clean their boards and take out their trash and do those type of things. So you just have to be careful about how you do the small things, and what again goes back to that a little bit of that political cost. So these next two are just a little bit of to get you thinking about that pain versus gain matrix. So if small visible cuts have low financial gain, oftentimes high political cost, structural changes that take time to put in place, and what maybe that's your grade configurations, maybe that's your student per teacher ratios that you're going to have to adjust a little bit. They have high financial gains, and they can have some moderate potential political costs as well. And then efficiency improvements. One of the complaints of the outside world is that schools don't operate very efficiently. So this is a good time to go back and just look at how do we operate as an organization with our efficiencies. Are we spending too much manpower in X where we could be spending it more useful here? So really evaluating all things for how efficient they are. This one is just to help you identify the things you really need to spend your time on. So low political costs, low financial input, you ignore. You avoid things with high political costs and no gain. And you want to prioritize those items that have low political cost and high financial impact. And then if they have both, you need to be really careful about how you manage them. All right, so again, this is going back. People don't experience budgets, or I'm sorry, people do experience budgets emotionally, not mathematically. So when you're talking about these things, and what I mean by that is they don't care that it saved X amount of dollars. They care how it impacts them, how it changes their reality. And so teachers feel supply cuts. They feel PD cuts. They feel when you don't pay that extra amount on their benefits that went up. So the health insurance went up $50 and you put it on them instead of taking that. So that's their reality. Communities notice when programs are impacted, when there's not sufficient staffing, they start to feel that. And then what boards hear are they hear complaints, not percentages. They don't need to know or they don't care about the $10,000 we saved by not buying new shoulder pads this year. What they care about is the complaints coming from the patrons. And so just understanding the reality of all of these different people that you work with. What's the board's reality? What's a teacher's reality? Et cetera. What are your parents and community members? What's their reality? So we get into kind of a decision framework. What is the target number? Do you understand what you're shooting for? Because if you're shooting for $10,000 savings, that might look a lot different than if you need to shoot for $100,000 savings. So knowing what your target is before you just start saying, well, we're going to cut. We need to cut because Massa sent out this, and the state's funding is going to go down. We just got to start cutting. Well, you need to kind of have an idea of what it is that you want to reach. It's like any other goal. You need to know what the goal is before you start working towards it. Is it controllable this year? So understanding that if you're trying to cut 10,000 out of this year's budget, is it something that you can actually impact over the next 12 months, or is that something more long term that you need to be thinking about? We've beat the is it going to move the needle on actual dollar costs? Who feels it immediately? And then always, is there a better alternative? And I think this is where having your stakeholders involved, having your principals, having some students, parents, board members involved in this long, maybe not for this current year, but long term, how do we reduce maybe 10% out of our budget? I think you need to have multiple people involved because they're going to give you different perspective. And there might be a better alternative that you haven't thought about. So this is just going back to budget control is not about cutting, it is about prioritizing. So when we think about that, we want to protect instruction all we can. We want to focus on magnitude, and then we want to be strategic, not reactive. So in other words, the time that you spend right now, if you're coming into a district, learning that district, studying their history, building out a past, creating some type of master planning document that gets you out 3, 5 years, then you will be um, up to speed. You'll be knowledgeable. You'll have some confidence in what you can change, what you can't change, what the magnitude of those items are. And then when you start bringing people in, it can be strategic because you have a framework, historical, looking forward. You can project what's this cut going to mean 5 years from now. So I like this comment. In tight times, your job isn't just to reduce spending, it's to protect what matters most while making financially prudent decisions. So in other words, as I walk through this process, how am I making sure that the students in my care are getting the greatest service possible, the greatest experience? Because I'm not going to be the one that sits here and says, hey, you can go cut your athletics and save, $100,000, and that's gonna be great. That is, to me, that is a student experience as well as band, choir, whatever extracurricular activities. To me, that is part of the instructional, part of the experience that students are getting to have as they go through your schools. So don't, I don't want you to think this is just focused on exactly what happens in the classroom. This is focused on the student experience and what they gain while they are in your care. And so, what are the things that support that maybe we can start to tweak that do not have a tremendous impact on their experience? So, that is a really quick overview of some challenging moments I think that we're all going to have as we move through the next few years. But hopefully, it gives you a little bit of way to kind of frame some of your decision making, encourage you to start thinking about what it looks like in your district, who needs to be involved, and turning over those rocks so that you can maybe find that thing that, aha, we can save $5,000 right here and nobody will even know it's gone. And maybe you can find two or three of those rocks that really jumpstart your process. Kelly, we got some time for questions today.
There you go. Uh, Anyone want to jump in? Do you have a question either about what was discussed today or something in the past sessions that you'd like to bring up? We may not have the answer right away, but uh, we're sure open for discussion.
Dr. Cummins, I have an idea I could put on the table that would maybe be helpful for you to talk
Awesome.
about. But it's on the
Please.
spot. I've been getting a lot of questions still about how people should think through when they're trying to decide what to budget for the SAT next year. Could you maybe talk through a little bit about how you look at your fund balance and willingness to accept risk and how you would choose what to do if you were advising somebody?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so there was a question I shared in the article this week that was asked about um, the projection model coming out with 6,500 on the SAT. And when I talked to Kyle, that was partly based upon prior to getting some of the lottery money filled with some more stable money. But he still believes they'll probably start there and move up through the numbers, hopefully get to 6,850 or a little more. And so I've told some of the schools I work with, we kind of started at 6,700, and I think that's kind of where most of them are going to stay. The the question becomes, and to Jordan's point, is at 6,700, I don't feel like if we get to 6,850, we've left a whole lot of money on the table that could have been used for current students. Now, depending on the size of the districts, that obviously could be a bigger number. But if we only get to 6,650, we haven't over budgeted that much. And in the situations that I'm dealing with, they have reserves that can handle that. So I think to the point is if I were to budget, so let's say we believe that DESE will ultimately pay at 6,850, so we're going to pay 6,850. In my mind, what you should have is you should know the exact difference between 6,850, 6,700, 6,600. So let's use a couple of examples. Let's say the difference in your district between 6,850 and 6,700 is $1.5 million, and the difference between 6,850 and 6,600 would be $2.5 million. If you're going to budget 6,850, you probably need to have in the back of your mind, where am I going to get that $1.5 million if it comes in at 67? And that could be as simple as, well, we have 13 million in reserves and we would spend that down by 1.5 million. And the board is on board with me. We've had that discussion. They know what that risk is, and our tolerance is okay. And oh, by the way, we've been a little bit conservative in our food service numbers. We've been a little bit conservative in our gate receipts and our local taxes. And there's a possibility that even though the state funded us at 1.5 million less, those others might be positive and make up that difference. But so that's I think that's the where we talk about being conservative or being aggressive, but having a plan if it comes up short. The flip side is being conservative and knowing that, okay, if it comes in at 1.5 million more than what I budgeted, where am I going to use that other than just building reserves? Unless I have a building reserve plan. I'm going to build some reserves up because we think maybe in 3 or 4 years we might need to pull some of those out. So that's the challenge of manipulating your estimates, your reserves, and the students that are currently in your care for this year is how aggressive or conservative do I want to be? But ultimately, I think what's important to each of you is to know exactly what that difference is. So what is the difference between 6,600, 6,700, and 6,850 if they get there or more? And that way the board says, okay, well, what happens if they end up holding out $100 on us? Well, that means X number of dollars to us. And this is how we would address that. Is that, Jordan, did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I think it's hard for people to decide what to use, and sometimes they would just like to be, and all of us would like to just be told what number to use. But I think you bring up a solid point. I do exactly what you did, is lay out all the scenarios and match it up with my salary increase package and decide which level of risk I'm happy with.
Yeah.
Yeah, the hardest thing about this process is the fact that we want to be accurate, and for a district our size, $150 difference, on the SAT, can be $200,000, and that makes you pretty inaccurate, and for myself specifically, the first couple of years, I was so conservative that it made me inaccurate to the good, but then it made me, lose some credibility of I'm sitting here going, we can't afford that, we can't afford that, we can't afford that, and then banked $900,000, and I was off 300,000 on my SAT guess from the beginning of the year. It's just really hard to be accurate when you don't know what that number is going to be.
No, I 100% get that, and that's always the challenge because people don't want to see I can't afford it, can't afford it, can't get raised, can't get raised, and then all of a sudden one of two things happens: your reserve percentage goes up at the end of the year, or you make a really big transfer to Fund 4 so that your reserve percentage doesn't go up. And not only is that, shorting the students for the current year, but it also is what MSTA and NEA pick at because that could have been paid out as a wage. To your point, and to Jordan's point, when I say know what that 1.5 million is that you can fall back on, some districts don't have a fallback. I mean, their reserves are so tight that they don't have a fallback. And in that case, I would never advise them to be aggressive. If your cash reserves are small because you're a small district, or your reserve percentage is really low, then that is going to impact your SAT setting. The lower your reserves, the tighter things are uh, I would dial that SAT back. If you're if you've got good cash and for a year you want to be aggressive and then you kind of see the trend, you have cushion to be aggressive. But that again, that's individual district specific based upon where you are at this moment.
Hey, Dr. Cummins, I've got a quick question for you. In the legislative bulletin that you sent out or that you were a part of on Monday, you had a note about being contacted from a superintendent about the DESI formula calculation tool and how they had 6,500 plugged in there.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure because I've got the April 21 formula tool on my computer right now, and it is showing an SAT of 6,700.
For 27?
For 26-27, it shows 6,700, and for 27-28, it still shows the 7145.
Yeah, I'm not sure. The one I downloaded, I think yesterday or the day before, um, that had the April 21st date on it, still came pre-populated at 65 in the on the yellow tab. So if it's now coming pre-populated at 6,700, um, I I'm not sure.
Okay, and
It's still
this
coming
I
at
down
65.
What's that?
It's still coming in at 65. I just downloaded it again.
Okay.
okay.
So
Jordan, I
Christian,
may share mine with you if that's okay, just to make sure I'm
yeah.
looking at the right thing.
Yeah, the yellow tab is where um, I think it's yellow. I don't have it in front of me.
It is. And you can change the numbers, Christian, so it's not a big deal, but
Yeah,
I'm happy to look and just make sure there's not something
Okay,
missing.
appreciate it.
yeah. You can just I mean you can make it anything you want. I think the alarming part was that when he got it and downloaded it and looked at the pre-populated amount, it was on his was 6,500.
Any other question?
Yeah, I had a quick question. With the SAT, let's just assume it's 6850. What are we assuming the CTF factor is then? Because DESI, in their April memo put out, I think 567. And right now, they have the wide range this year of like 505 all the way up to 579. So what are we assuming the CTF for next year?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I've always just kind of leaned on um, Desi's estimate. What I what I would what I would encourage you is the unless you are moving some of that to Fund 4 and that amount is really critical for you, the amount that they split between guaranteed payment and CTF has minimal impact for operations for Fund 1 and 2. But if you're looking at how do I what do I know that I can put into Fund 4? My guess is that you can go back to your maximum amount that you could put into Fund 4, look back to 2010, 11, I think it was, in it that you can find out what your maximum Fund 4 placement is. But my guess is that the CTF will not be lower than that. So in other words, if you've been putting $100 into Fund 4 and you want to make sure that you can continue to maximize that, you can run the numbers and see that the projection, whether it's 505 or 530, is going to be more, and you can still make your $100 placement into Fund 4. You can do that. Otherwise, the difference between 505 and 525 really only impacts Fund 2, Fund 1 placement. I hope that helps answer that question.
Thank
You have a
you.
question in the comments too, Dr. Cummins.
Yeah, I'll just say it. I think you kind of answered it when you were talking about cuts, but what I'm hearing is, and I just want to clarify if this is still the thinking, that 26, 27 is going to be tight. Is 27, 28 going to be tighter? Is the first part of that. And then the second part is, if that's the case, even if we have a healthy reserve where I'm at right now, should we be more aggressive about cuts this year so we're prepared for 27, 28? Or how do you think that's looking?
Yeah, so my opinion is it's not going to get better anytime soon. I have not heard anything that would give that indication. So to me, if you can, and the thing I always go back on is if there is a position that is open now, and we're gonna get into this more next week when I talk about RIF versus attrition. If there is a position I can not fill today, that is a minimum of 50 grand that I'm saving this year, and I'm likely going to continue to save. Rather than filling that position this year and then assuming that maybe there will be a position next year that's an attritionable, I don't know if that's a word, position and that can take its place next year. So I think anything that you can do in the kind of in the line of efficiency in creating this start to a better budget. I don't want to say a better budget that matches what we have projected for revenue coming up. I think, yes, starting now is prudent, and especially when it comes to filling open staffing positions. That's a good question.
We had a question about the next session. It'll be on May 19th, same time. And I believe we only pushed out links for these first 4, so we'll send out a new link. And it will probably have not only that link, but the June links as well, built into the announcement.
Yes,
So
and
be
just
looking for that.
a quick reminder, Kelly, please, if you have thoughts about personnel, anything you want to discuss or would like for me to try to touch on, please let Chelsea or I know in the next couple of days, because I'll start working on that probably on Thursday. And so I'd love to incorporate anything that you'd like to hear about.
I'll remind everyone that the past sessions are all available on our website, on the Tight Times page. The banner, you can just click on the banner on our website and it'll take you right to that page. So if you missed a session, if you missed the one on personnel last week and you want to listen through it, and then maybe that might generate some questions for Jim that you want to have addressed. So I would encourage you to do that. All the resources are there. Today's session we'll put up as soon as we get it ready. And if Jim has some resources, he'll send those as well. If there's no more questions, we're going to sign off. I appreciate the time. Appreciate Jim and Jordan. Thank you for being on as well and generating some conversation. Hope you end the school year well, and hopefully we'll see you all next Tuesday at the same time. Thank you.
Happy graduation.